Trail camera footage showed everything. Clear as day. My daughter minus lodge Jennifer walking into my lake house with some guy I'd never seen before. My name's Richard Coleman. I'm 57, and after 25 years in the Navy, I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. Let me back up. The lake house had always been sacred ground for our family. Helen and I bought it 30 years ago when Michael was just a kid. We'd spend summers there, holidays, quiet weekends fishing off that old wooden dock. Helen passed 3 years ago and I've been keeping the place up. Mostly for Michael and his family. He's got 2 kids now with Jennifer minus Susan, who's 6, and little Timothy, who's 4. The place sits on 15 acres of Kentucky lake country, about 2 hours north of Louisville where I live now. Remote enough that you don't get casual visitors, but close enough to the main road that I worry about break-ins when I'm not around. That's why I installed the trail cameras last fall, -4 of them positioned around the property perimeter. I'd driven up that Thursday afternoon to meet with Brian Taylor, a contractor who was supposed to look at replacing the dock. The old planks were rotting something fierce, and I wanted it fixed before spring when the grandkids would be running around on it. Brian was running late, texted me he'd be another hour, so I figured I'd check the security footage while I waited. That's when I saw it. Silver BMW in Tuesday's recording. Didn't recognize it at all. I know every neighbor's car within 10 miles, minus old habit from my Navy days. Always know your surroundings, who belongs and who doesn't. But there it was, parked right next to Jennifer's white Lexus S UV at 15. In the afternoon, I fast-forwarded through the recording, my stomach starting to knot up. Jennifer got out of her car first, looking around like she was checking to make sure nobody was watching. Then this tall guy in expensive clothes stepped out of the BMW. They didn't just walk toward my house, they were holding hands, laughing together, comfortable with each other like they'd done this routine before. My chest tightened. Michael was in Seattle that week, working on a big highway construction project his company had landed. Good money job, lots of overtime. He'd called me just 2 days before, excited about the extra pay. Said it would help with building the kids' college funds. Here he was, busting his back 12 hours a day in the Pacific Northwest train, while his wife was using our family sanctuary for God knows what. I sat there in my truck watching this footage on my phone, and 25 years of military discipline kicked in. First rule of combat don't react emotionally. Gather intelligence first. Assess the situation. Make a plan. React with your head, not your gut. I called Brian and told him something had come up. Asked if we could push our meeting back a couple hours. Then I drove around to the back side of the property where there's an old logging trail Helen and I used to walk every morning when she was alive. From there, I had a clear sight line to the back windows of the house without being spotted from inside or from the main road. I pulled out the binoculars I keep in the truck for checking on the deer population during hunting season. Through those big lakeside windows, the ones Helen had insisted on so she could watch the sunrise while drinking her coffee, I could see them clear as anything. Jennifer was sitting on Helen's old couch, that burgundy sectional where my wife used to read her mystery novels on summer evenings, wrapped in the quilt her grandmother had made. This stranger was right next to her, his arm around her shoulders like he belonged there, like he had every right to be in my home. Touching my furniture, breathing the air in rooms where my wife had lived and loved. As I watched, he leaned over and kissed her neck. Jennifer threw her head back and laughed. That same laugh I'd heard at countless family dinners when Michael would tell some story from a construction site. The same laugh from Christmas mornings when the kids opened their presents. From birthday parties and backyard barbecues and every family gathering for the past 8 years. My hands were shaking as I held those binoculars. Part of me wanted to storm in there right then, throw the guy out on his rear end, and demand an explanation. That's what my gut was screaming at me to do. But I'd learned something in 25 years of naval service: emotion gets people hurt. Intelligence wins battles. Strategy beats simple every single time. I forced myself to stay hidden and keep watching. Forced myself to document what I was seeing instead of just reacting to it. I took photos through the binoculars with my phone. Not great quality, but clear enough to show what was happening. Then I moved around to where I could see the front of the house and got a clean shot of that BMW's license plate. Over the next hour, I watched them move around my house like they owned it. Saw him pour my wine minus into 2 glasses. Watched them stand at the back door looking out at the lake, his arms wrapped around her from behind. They looked comfortable, natural, like a real couple who'd been together for years. This wasn't some impulsive mistake. This was a full minus blown relationship happening in my family's most sacred space. Around for 30. They finally came outside. The guy walked to his BMW like he didn't have a care in the world. Confident stride, expensive clothes, probably 40 years old with dark hair and the kind of build that said he spent more time in gyms than construction sites. He looked successful, polished. The kind of man who never got dirt under his fingernails. Jennifer stood in the doorway watching him leave, then carefully locked the house with her key minus, the spare key I'd given Michael years ago for family emergencies. They didn't leave together. Smart. No chance of neighbors seeing them as a couple. No witnesses to connect them if anyone asked questions later. I waited until both cars had been gone for 20 minutes before I went inside. The place was spotless. Wine glasses washed and put away in exactly the right cabinet. Couch cushions fluffed and straightened. Even the throw pillows were arranged the way Helen used to keep them. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have known anyone had been there. But I had seen it. And now I had a decision to make that would change everything. That night back in Louisville, I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus on anything except what I'd witnessed. I kept seeing that image of Jennifer on Helen's couch with that stranger. Both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Like betraying my son and desecrating my wife's memory was just another Tuesday afternoon. I walked around my house for hours, trying to process it all. In the kitchen, I stared at the refrigerator covered with photos of family gatherings. There was Jennifer at last Christmas, sitting next to Michael under our tree, both kids on her lap. That sweet smile I thought was genuine. There she was at Susan's 6th birthday party, helping my granddaughter blow out candles, looking like the perfect mother and wife. All lies. Every single moment. I thought about Michael, probably calling Jennifer right about now from his hotel in Seattle, telling her about his day, asking about the kids, maybe mentioning how much he missed her. Had no clue his wife was planning her next rendezvous with Mr. BMW while he earned overtime pay in the rain. By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. This wasn't something I could handle alone, and it definitely wasn't something I could mess up. If I was going to protect my son and grandchildren, I needed professional help. I needed facts, not just suspicions on blurry phone photos. The next morning, I made some calls. In the Navy, you learn the value of good intelligence contacts. People you can trust to handle sensitive situations without asking unnecessary questions. Stephen Walsh ran a private investigation firm out of Lexington. We'd served together on the USS Kentucky back in the 92nds. Stephen was a sonar technician then, good at finding things that were hidden underwater. Turned out he was just as good at finding things people tried to hide on dry land. I drove to Lexington that afternoon and met Stephen at a coffee shop downtown. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples, but he still had that same sharp look in his eyes. The kind of guy who noticed everything but said very little until he was sure of his facts. I showed him the photos and explained what I'd seen. Gave him the license plate number and asked him to find out everything he could about the car's owner. Stephen listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. "How deep you want me to dig?" he asked when I finished. "All the way," I told him. "My son's got 2 kids to think about. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Stephen nodded. "Give me 48 hours. He called me back the next evening with a preliminary report. The BMW was registered to Bradley Phillips, 42 years old, owned Phillips used cars in Bowling Green. Married to Lisa Phillips for 16 years, had 2 teenage children. On the surface, he looked like a successful small business owner. Nice house in a good neighborhood, kids in private school, country club membership. But Stephen wasn't done. "There's more," he said, "and you're not going to like it." Over the next week, Stephen dug deeper into Bradley Phillips' life, And what he found made my blood run cold. Philip's car dealership was hemorrhaging money. He'd taken out a second mortgage on his house 8 months ago, maxed out 3 credit cards, and was behind on payments to his inventory lenders. The guy was drowning in debt but still trying to maintain his wealthy lifestyle. But that wasn't the worst part. Stephen found something that hit me like a physical blow minus irregularities in the joint checking account Michael shared with Jennifer. She'd been making cash withdrawals. Small amounts at first. $200 here, $300 there. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for patterns, but Stephen was good at finding patterns. Over the past 8 months, the withdrawals had gotten bigger. $500, $1,000, $2,000. Always on days when Michael was out of town for construction jobs. Always cash, so there was no paper trail of where the money went. The total came to just over $15,000. I stared at that number on Stephen's report, feeling sick to my stomach. $15,000. That was supposed to be Timothy's college fund. Susan's dance lessons for the next 2 years. The vacation Michael had been planning to take the kids to Disney World next summer. Money my son had earned working 60-hour weeks in all kinds of weather. Saving every extra dollar for his family's future. And Jennifer had been stealing it. Bit by bit, month by month. While Michael was out earning it. Probably handing it over to Bradley Phillips to help fund his failing business and expensive lifestyle. There's more, Stephen said when he saw my face. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a weekend trip to Nashville last April. Your daughter minus lot older son. She was going on a girls' weekend with her college friends. Remember? I did remember. Michael had mentioned it. Said he was glad Jennifer was taking some time for herself, getting away with old friends. He'd even offered to pay for her hotel room. She was with Phillips the whole time, Stephen continued. Hermitage Hotel, $800 a night. Fancy restaurants, shopping, the works. All paid for with cash that came from your son's account. I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process the full scope of the betrayal. This wasn't just an affair. This was systematic theft. This was Jennifer consciously choosing to fund her lover's lifestyle with money that belonged to her children's future. How long has this been going on? I asked. Best I can tell, at least 14 months. Maybe longer. The cash withdrawals started getting regular about 8 months ago. But there are signs they've been seeing each other since early last year. 14 months. Over a year of lies, theft, and betrayal. While Michael worked overtime to provide for his family, Jennifer had been systematically robbing them to support the man she was cheating with. I thanked Stephen and paid him for his work. Drove home in a daze, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. This wasn't just about confronting Jennifer anymore. This was about protecting Michael's financial future and ensuring he didn't lose his children to someone who had proven she couldn't be trusted with anything that mattered. That night, I called Margaret Davis, one of the best family lawyers in Kentucky. Margaret and I went way back. I'd helped her brother sort out a security clearance issue during his Navy days, and she'd always said she owed me a favor. Time to collect. I met Margaret at her office the next morning and laid out everything. The photos from the lake house, Stephen's investigation, the financial records showing 14 months of systematic theft. Margaret listened carefully, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, reviewing her notes. Richard, she finally said, this is bad. But it's also an opportunity. She explained the legal landscape. In Kentucky, adultery itself might not heavily influence divorce proceedings anymore, but financial misconduct was different. If Jennifer had been systematically stealing from marital assets to fund her affair, that was dissipation of marital funds. It could significantly impact property division, spousal support, and most importantly, custody arrangements. What about the kids? I asked. That's all I really cared about, with evidence of the affair, the financial theft, and her pattern of deception. Michael's got a very strong case for primary custody. Courts don't look kindly on parents who steal from their children's future to fund extramarital relationships. Margaret leaned forward in her chair. But timing is everything. We need to make sure Michael's prepared for this conversation. We need all documentation in perfect order. And we need to act before Jennifer has any chance to hide assets or destroy evidence. I understood. This was like planning a military operation. Every detail mattered. Every step had to be coordinated. And when we moved, we had to move fast and decisively. What's the first step? I asked. Margaret looked at me seriously. You have to tell your son. That was the conversation I'd been dreading since the moment I saw Jennifer through those lake house windows. How do you tell your son that his wife has been betraying him? That the woman he loves, the mother of his children, has been systematically stealing from their future to fund an affair with another man? I called Michael when he got back from Seattle on Friday. Told him I needed to discuss something important and asked if he could come over to my house on Sunday afternoon. He sounded tired but agreed, probably thinking I wanted to talk about the lake house repairs, or maybe ask him to help with some project around my place. If only it were that simple. Sunday came too fast and not fast enough. I spent the morning pacing around my house, rehearsing different ways to start the conversation. How do you ease into news like that? How do you soften the blow of finding out your entire marriage has been built on lies? Michael arrived at 2 p.m., still wearing his work clothes from the construction site. He looked tired minus the kind of bone minus deep exhaustion that comes from working 12-hour days in rough weather. But his face lit up when he saw me. Same smile he'd had since he was a kid. Hey, Dad. It's so important that it couldn't wait for our regular Sunday dinner. I led him into my study, the room where I'd spent countless hours during my Navy career reviewing intelligence reports and making tactical decisions. The room where I'd always felt most in control of difficult situations. Today, I felt anything but in control. Michael, sit down. We need to talk about Jennifer. Something in my voice must have warned him. His smile faded, and I saw a flicker of concern cross his face. Is she okay? Did something happen? I started with the lake house visit, explaining about meeting Brian Taylor to discuss the dock repairs. Told him about checking the trail camera footage and seeing the silver BMW I didn't recognize. Michael listened quietly, but I could see his jaw getting tighter as I talked. When I got to the part about seeing Jennifer through the windows with another man, Michael went pale. He started shaking his head before I even finished the sentence. No, Dad, that's not possible. Jennifer would never do that. She loves me. She loves our family. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken. Watched my 35-year-old son's face crumble like he was 6 years old again and had just learned his goldfish died. Michael stared at those images for what felt like forever. Jennifer on Helen's couch with Bradley Phillips. The kiss. The intimate way they moved around each other like they'd done it hundreds of times before. Who is he? Michael's voice came out as barely a whisper. I told him everything Stephen had found. Bradley Phillips, 42 years old, married, father of 2, owner of a failing car dealership. The 14-month timeline. The hotel receipts. The trip to Nashville that Jennifer had claimed was a girls' weekend. But the worst part was still coming. Michael, there's something else. Something about your bank account. I showed him Stephen's financial investigation. The pattern of cash withdrawals over the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums. Always when he was out of town. Always cash, no paper trail. $15,000, I said quietly. She's taken $15,000 from your joint account. Michael looked at me like I'd punched him in the stomach. 15,000? That's... He stopped, doing the math in his head. That's Timothy's college fund, Susan's dance lessons, the Disney trip I promised them. I know, son. Michael stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the backyard where he used to play when he was little. His shoulders were shaking, and I knew he was trying not to cry in front of me. How long have you known? He asked without turning around. About a week. I wanted to make sure I had all the facts before I told you. A week. He turned back to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. He was trying to blink away. Jesus, Dad. While I was working overtime in Seattle, thinking about how the extra money would help us get ahead, she was. He couldn't finish the sentence. I gave him time to process it all. Sat there watching my son's world fall apart and hated every second of it. This was worse than any combat situation I'd faced in the Navy. At least in military conflicts, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemy had been living in my son's house, sleeping in his bed, raising his children. After about 10 minutes, Michael sat back down. His face had changed. The shock was still there. But underneath it, I could see something harder forming. Determination, maybe. Or just the realization that he had to figure out what came next. What do I do, Dad? I told him about Margaret Davis and her legal advice. Explained how the financial theft actually gave him leverage in divorce proceedings on custody battles. How Jennifer's pattern of deception and her willingness to steal from her own children's future could work in his favor. I want to confront her, Michael said. I want to look her in the eye and ask her how she could do this to us. I understood the impulse, but I also knew that emotional reactions rarely lead to good outcomes. We can do that. But we need to be strategic about it. Margaret says timing is everything. If we tip Jennifer off too early, she might destroy evidence or try to hide assets. That's when I told Michael about the phone call I was planning to make. Not to Jennifer, not to Bradley Phillips, but to someone else entirely. Phillips' wife, I explained. Lisa Phillips. She's been married to this guy for 16 years, has 2 teenage kids with him. She deserves to know the truth just as much as you do. Michael looked confused. Why call her? Because if we coordinate our timing, if she confronts Bradley at the exact same moment you confront Jennifer, neither one of them can warn the other. They'll both be blindsided just like you were. Just like she's about to be. I pulled out the piece of paper where I'd written Lisa Phillips' phone number. Stephen had found it for me as part of his investigation. This woman's life is about to be destroyed the same way yours has been, I continued. She's going to lose her husband, probably her house, maybe even her kids' college funds if Phillips has been stealing from their accounts too. She has a right to know, and strategically, having her on our side gives us a stronger position. Michael was quiet for a long time, thinking it through. Finally, he nodded. When? Tomorrow night. I'll call her first, explain what we've discovered, send her copies of the evidence. Give her time to process it and decide what she wants to do. If she agrees to coordinate with us, we'll set up simultaneous confrontations. You talk to Jennifer at your house while Lisa talks to Bradley at theirs. And if she doesn't want to coordinate, then we proceed on our own. But Michael, I think she'll want to know. I think she'll want justice just as much as we do. I looked at my son, seeing him struggle with everything he'd learned. There's one more thing. Margaret says we need to secure your financial assets before the confrontation. Move your paycheck to a separate account. Document everything that's currently in your joint accounts. Make sure Jennifer can't clean you out if she panics. Michael nodded slowly. He looked older than when he'd walked into hours ago. The trusting, optimistic man who believed his wife loved him was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that the people closest to you can hurt you the worst. Dad, he said quietly. Thank you for finding out the truth, for handling it the right way instead of just, I don't know, barging in there and making everything worse. That's what fathers do, son. We protect our children, no matter how old they get. The next evening, I made the phone call that would change everything. Lisa Phillips answered on the second ring. Her voice was pleasant, unsuspecting. She probably thought I was trying to sell her something or maybe calling about her husband's car dealership. Mrs. Phillips, my name is Richard Coleman. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some information about your husband that I think you need to know. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was different, cautious. What kind of information? Information about an ongoing affair between Bradley and my daughter Minus and Minus Law. I have evidence that they've been seeing each other for over a year. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Can you prove it? I told her I could send her documentation minus photos, hotel receipts, financial records. She gave me her email address without hesitation. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Mr. Coleman, thank you for calling me. Lisa's voice was shaking now, but there was something else in it. Relief, maybe. I've suspected something for months, but I couldn't prove it. This explains so much minus the second mortgage, the late nights, the business trips that never seemed to generate any income. We talked for almost an hour. Two parents whose families had been destroyed by the same selfish choices, trying to figure out how to protect what was left. Lisa told me about Bradley's mounting debts, how he'd been hiding financial problems from her for over a year, how their kids' college funds had mysteriously shrunk, how she'd started questioning whether their marriage was worth saving even before she knew about Jennifer. By the end of that conversation, we had our plan. Friday night, Lisa said. Bradley will be home from the dealership by 6 p.m. I'll make sure the kids are at my sister's house. Michael will confront Jennifer at the same time. That way, neither one can warn the other or coordinate their stories. Mr. Coleman, Lisa said before she hung up, I'm glad you called me instead of just handling this within your family. I deserve to know. She was right. She did deserve to know. And strategically, having her as an ally instead of another victim made all the difference. Friday came faster than I wanted. Michael had spent the week moving his paycheck to a separate account and documenting all their joint assets. Margaret Davis had prepared preliminary divorce papers. Ready to file first thing Monday morning. We were as ready as we could be. I met Michael at his house at 5 p.m. Margaret was there too, going over the plan one final time. Michael would handle the confrontation alone, minus Jennifer was more likely to break down and tell the truth if she wasn't facing multiple accusers. But we'd be right there if he needed backup. Jennifer arrived home at 5:45 with Susan and Timothy. The kids ran inside first, excited to see their dad home early from work. Michael hugged them both tighter than usual, and I saw him blink away tears as he sent them upstairs to play. Jennifer came in carrying grocery bags, smiling when she saw Michael. You're home early. Thought the highway project was running through the weekend. We need to talk, Michael said. Kids, go up to your rooms for a while. Something in his voice made Jennifer's smile falter. About what? Michael didn't answer, just walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. Jennifer followed, sitting across from him in the armchair, looking confused and maybe a little worried. That's when Michael told her everything. The lake house footage, the investigation, Bradley Phillips, the 14 months of lies, the $15,000 stolen from their children's future. I watched Jennifer's face go through a dozen different expressions. Shock, denial, fear, and then, when Michael mentioned the money, something harder replaced all of it. Who's been spying on me? She demanded. Your father? This is harassment. I stepped into the room. Jennifer saw me and actually took a step backward. Nobody spied on anyone, I said calmly. I saw what I saw at my own lake house. The evidence speaks for itself. And right now, Lisa Phillips is having this exact same conversation with your boyfriend. Jennifer's face crumbled. The mention of Lisa Phillips minus, the fact that Bradley's wife knew everything minus seemed to hit her harder than anything else Michael had said. She tried begging then. Said it was a mistake, that Phillips had manipulated her, that she'd pay back every penny. But when Michael asked her if she loved Bradley, she couldn't even look him in the eye. I want a divorce, Michael said. 2 words that ended 8 years of marriage. The next few months were difficult but straightforward. Margaret was brilliant in court. The photos, bank records, and testimony from Lisa Phillips minus, who had indeed filed for divorce the same night minus, made Jennifer's position hopeless. Michael was awarded primary custody of Susan and Timothy. Jennifer got supervised visits every other weekend. The property settlement heavily favored Michael, accounting for the stolen money and her breach of marital trust. Bradley Phillips fared even worse. His dealership collapsed when the second mortgage came due and he couldn't make payments. Lisa took him for everything in their divorce, including the kids' college funds he'd been dipping into. Last I heard, he was working at a chain electronics store in Bowling Green, living in a studio apartment. Jennifer moved back in with her parents. She tried reaching out to Michael several times over the following months, asking for another chance, claiming she'd learned her lesson. Michael never responded. As for me, I still have the lake house. Went back there last month for the first time since that Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Sat on the dock where Helen and I used to watch sunsets and felt her presence again, stronger than it had been in years. The place felt clean again somehow. Michael brought Susan and Timothy up for a long weekend. We taught Timothy how to cast a fishing line from Helen's favorite spot on the dock. Susan collected interesting rocks along the shoreline, building elaborate castles in the sand. Their laughter echoed across the water the way it should. Michael sat beside me on that old dock, both of us with fishing lines in the water that probably didn't have any fish near them. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "For what?" "For handling it right. For not just storming in there that day when you found them. For building a case instead of just reacting." I told him that's what fathers do. We protect our children, no matter how old they get. We use our heads instead of our hearts when the situation calls for it. We make the hard choices so our kids don't have to. Michael's been dating someone new recently. Carol, a teacher at Susan's school. She seems genuine. Kind? Nothing like Jennifer. Met her last Sunday when Michael brought her to dinner. She shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said she'd heard wonderful things about me. "All true, I hope," I said. She smiled. Every word. That night, after they left, I sat in my study thinking about everything that had happened. The lake house, the investigation, the phone calls, the legal proceedings. It had been a long, painful road. Looking at Michael now, seeing him smile again, watching my grandkids laugh without knowing how close they came to a very different kind of life, I know I made the right choice. One phone call. That's all it took. Not to my son, but to another victim who deserved the truth as much as he did. Sometimes justice isn't about anger or revenge. Sometimes it's just about giving people the information they need to make their own choices. Jennifer and Bradley made their choices. They're living with the consequences. Michael chose to rebuild. And that's what matters most. That's what fathers do, minus we protect our families, whatever it takes. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, minus they're won in living rooms and courtrooms, where strategy and evidence defeat lies and betrayal. My father's love isn't measured by how quickly he reacts to protect his family, but by how wisely he plans to ensure they never face the same threat again.